Today, around 20,000 members of the Teachers' Federation, around 20,000 members of the Teachers' Federation met at over 200 venues right across New South Wales to hear very detailed reports on a new salaries award and to endorse the terms of settlement. I'm pleased to report that the votes have come in and just over 96% of those attending the meetings have endorsed the recommendation. So this is an overwhelming endorsement of the executive recommendation. The new terms of settlement will preserve all existing working conditions, will provide a modest salary increase, which I'll get to in a moment, but also, and very importantly, protect the professional status of teachers by protecting qualifications. In other states and territories, and indeed at the federal government level, we see that the notion of a qualified teacher being put in front of children is under attack. But in New South Wales, we made it a priority to ensure that in this award, the qualifications of teachers and entry into teaching and the standards that brings will be preserved and protected in the award for 3 years and hopefully beyond. So for parents of New South Wales, what the Federation has achieved today is the protection of those qualifications, and they can be assured that in public schools across New South Wales there'll be qualified teachers always be teaching their children, unlike what is happening in other states where the coalition govern, and unlike what Tony Abbott and Christopher Pyne would like to introduce nationally. The conditions have been preserved, as I said. There is a new pay scale for teachers. That means that from 2016 on, those joining the profession will get to the top of the scale in a quicker time than had they been in the old scale, and indeed they'll probably earn about $45,000 extra by the time they get to that top of the scale compared to the current scale. There's a new principals classification system. But what we did secure in that principals classification system is the protection of all small schools who will retain their principal and retain the release time for their principals. Now that was under attack, but in negotiations we secured that protection for all small schools right across New South Wales. So I'll leave it there, and you might have some questions you'd like to ask me.
We're talking a lot about how to attract the best and brightest to the profession. Do you think that this new option of a 6-figure salary for a classroom teacher who reaches a highly accomplished standard will go towards achieving that?
There's a new classification that sits above the top of the scale, and the salary will be in excess of $100,000. Now that's going to be a voluntary classification. It means that those teachers who may not want to seek promotion, who may not want to get involved in the administration side of running a school, but who want to stay in the classroom, but play a role in mentoring young teachers, that they can access that classification and get a much higher salary. I think that is an important achievement. The Federation have been pursuing that now for at least 6 or 7 years as a policy objective, and in this award we have achieved the creation of that new highly accomplished teacher classification that sits above the top of the scale.
You mentioned some of the things that you've won, but what about some of the things that you've lost, or you guys are pretty happy with the outcome?
We would never have asked for members to endorse anything if it had losses in it. We go to the membership always confident that what we're asking them to endorse is a salary package and award conditions that can be defended and protected. So there's been no concessions, there's been nothing given up, and what we have achieved, of course, is a salary increase. Now, just on the salary increase, we have a public sector wages policy in New South Wales that the O'Farrell government has legislated since coming to office in 2011. That is a policy that punishes those people who work in the public sector. It has no effect on teachers, for instance, in the private sector, but it punishes teachers in the public sector and imposes an unfair cap. And what the meetings today endorsed in overwhelming numbers, as I said, 96% of the members who turned up, in excess of 20,000 members, what those members endorsed was a very strong campaign that has to be well-resourced. They've told the union they want a well-resourced campaign next year to fight the O'Farrell government on the public sector wages policy. We can't ask the best and the brightest of those people seeking entry into university to come into teaching if we continue to impose an unfair salary cap on them. And part of protecting the qualifications was to at least ensure that we've got professional status there, but the status also involves a decent salary. And with a wages cap, that salary is being artificially restrained, and we need to break through, and we'll do that in a campaign next year during 2014. That's what the members have told the leadership of the union to develop.
So that campaign could include more stop works?
Well, it will be a range of actions and that we will need to do, but of course it affects all public sector workers, nurses, police, firefighters, public servants, all those people who do the work that our community needs. And so we won't be doing this alone. The membership have asked us to do this in collaboration with all other public sector workers. So we will be approaching our colleagues in other public sector unions and saying to them, let's join together. This is unfair on all public sector workers. It's unfair on nurses, it's unfair on police, it's unfair on firefighters, and it certainly is unfair on teachers. This is something that the O'Farrell government has imposed through legislation. They changed the law to make the independent umpire, the Industrial Relations Commission, unable to bring down a decision that is in breach of government policy. So even the independence of the IRC in trying to determine any increase in salary is being denied to teachers and other public sector workers. It's a very unfair, it's a very unjust policy, and our members are very frustrated that this salary cap is being artificially imposed. We'll need to break through, but we will break through in collaboration with our public sector colleagues.
Do you think this campaign will be successful?
I think it will be successful. The Miranda by-election was only a few weeks ago, and there was a swing of 27% against the O'Farrell government, and the firefighters and nurses and other people were prominent and our TAFE teachers were prominent in that campaign. There's a review of the policy in June next year, and we aim to make sure that our voice are heard in that review, and we'll be putting a very clear message to the O'Farrell government that it's an injustice. And of course there's a March 2015 state election. And we'll be saying to those coalition MPs who are sitting on marginal seats, we're coming after you. If you think that public sector workers are going to have their salaries capped forever, then you've got another thing coming. You will not remain in Parliament if you continue to pursue this punitive action in suppressing the salaries of public sector workers. So there'll be a very clear message to those members of the coalition who are in vulnerable seats. You need to send a clear message to Mr O'Farrell that they want the policy changed.
What do you see as the biggest win for you in this award?
The biggest win for us was to protect our qualifications. We've got a pay scale now that's referenced to Institute standards. That means that the Act that set up the Institute of Teaching in New South Wales preserves qualifications. So, but in Victoria, for instance, we see that teachers, people can come into teaching in Victoria after only 6 weeks of training. That's clearly unsatisfactory. I don't think there'd be a parent in Australia who would accept that you can put an unqualified person in front of a class. But in New South Wales, by referencing this to our pay scale to the standards, by introducing the highly accomplished position, we have now locked in the preservation of our qualifications in an award that can regulate them.
Was it a tough fight?
All negotiations are tough, particularly when you've got a government that is hell-bent on knowing the cost of everything and the value of nothing. But we certainly won a whole lot of other measures. We've won an additional $100 million for release time for new teachers, beginning teachers, young teachers who come into the profession now get a couple of hours of release time each week, and their mentor teacher gets release time as well. That's a significant betterment. We've won an additional $17 million in professional development money to go into schools, because we're going to have an inexperienced teaching workforce in the years ahead, and that professional development is very important. And so there was those sorts of wins that we think that the membership need to hear about today, and indeed they endorsed the recommendation.
When you say over 100,000 for these accomplished teacher positions, exactly at what level does it kick in? 110, 120, 105?
It's a midway point. The highly accomplished classification, remember, is not an actual position. It's a status that you achieve by going through an accreditation process with the New South Wales Institute of Teachers. Once you get that accreditation, and you certainly have to maintain the accreditation, but once you get it, then you are classified as a highly accomplished, and that position goes with you. If you change schools, you are still paid at that salary level. It kicks in at about midway point between the very top of the scale for the teachers who are at the very top, and the first promotion position. So it kicks in, as I was saying, between the highly accomplished, the top of the scale, and the first promotion level, about a midway point, which puts the figure at just over $101,000.
According to these results from the vote, the Federation must be incredibly pleased that you're moving away from a system that rewards teachers based on the time they've spent in the classroom toward a system that also puts an emphasis on how well they're teaching our children.
Well, it doesn't. What we have retained in this salary scale is that teachers will be rewarded for staying in teaching, and it'll be automatic steps, annual steps. So there's no change in that respect. Teachers, as they get more experienced and older, at each step of the way they get a salary increment. So
performance-based will become a bigger part of this?
Not at all. It's not performance-based. All teachers get paid for performance. And always have been paid for performance. What we have now is a compressed scale where they can get to the top earlier. But the progressions from each step will be automatic, of course, subject to the normal efficiency processes that we apply each year to judge teachers. So there's no changes to that. It's automatic progression and increments through to 7 years.
So teachers have always had annual reviews?
Always had annual reviews.
Right.
We've always had annual reviews. We'll continue to have annual reviews, and indeed the Federation supports the notion of having annual reviews, provided that it's professionally done, it's collegial, it's collaborative, and it's done in a supportive environment. And we'll be engaging with the department in developing that performance and development framework. But I want to emphasise that this is a pay scale where teachers will progress annually once they achieve accreditation through the top of scale. Instead of taking 9 years to get to the top, it'll take 7 years. There are no quotas and there are no barriers once accreditation has been achieved. No quotas, no barriers.
Would you like to be dealing with Adrian Piccoli more regularly than, say, Christopher Pyne? Because Adrian Piccoli, at least, seemed more reasonable when it comes to the Gonski review and also the meeting last Friday, whereas Christopher Pyne seems to have a very different view of what is needed here in New South Wales in terms of education funding.
I think the great problem with Christopher Pyne is that he doesn't read. The Gonski review was released in February 2012. It was a 286-page document. Within 10 minutes, he had a media release out rejecting all 286 pages. Now, unless he's an extraordinary speed reader or he has prejudged the outcome of the review, I'll leave that up to you. But my suspicions are that Christopher Pyne does not know what's in the Gonski model, has not bothered to read the review, and has just clung to old values of protecting the advantaged and the privileged at the expense of the disadvantaged. And he wants a school funding system that preserves that privilege. And he'll do anything he can to try and scuttle the Gonski funding reform. His deceit and his lies continue even as late as yesterday. There's been more policy backflips on Gonski than as exercised by a Russian gymnast at the Olympics. All for political purposes. All for political purposes. Not because of any commitment to the children of Australia, but purely to save his political hide. But he's been quite clear. He has opposed the Gonski funding model from day one. And for 2 years, he consistently opposed it in Parliament and in the media and at meetings. And then once achieving government, he has continued to try and torpedo it. And each and every day, the policy backflip is only to try and save his political hide. We now need to put Christopher Pyne on notice. We don't trust you, the profession doesn't trust you, and we're going to hold you to account. It's a 6-year funding model. It's a 6-year funding model that the New South Wales government signed up for, and we'll be making damn sure that the community of New South Wales, indeed across Australia, will be pursuing the Gonski funding model that we signed up for. We haven't come this far to concede anything on Gonski. There's too much at risk.